Hello, everyone. To all of our wonderful listeners out there, we come to you again with a fantastic show. And I know, listeners, you hear this from me all the time about how this is such a wonderful show. But, you know, I'm biased, so just bear with me. But we do want to thank our listeners that continue to, wanting to learn more about all of these great stories that we bring. And so thank you, listeners, for those that keep coming back. We have a great show today, and the reason why I'm framing this as a great show is because this is a story that I've been wanting to do now for a few months. And the reason why is because I know, listeners, there's been a lot of media attention around some of the decisions that are being made regarding the U.S. healthcare system under the new administration. And for those of our listeners who are in other countries, hopefully you'll get a little bit of a nugget coming off of this show, given some of the things that we are going through here in the United States. And, listeners, what I want to say is that this isn't a political show at all. This really is about bringing you the human side of things that are happening in the Commonwealth of Virginia as a little snippet, if you will, of what's happening in the state of Virginia that's also happening throughout the U.S. And so this particular show is the beginning of a series that we want to do with regards to still staying in a framework of healthcare services, but actually more specifically about healthcare access, right? How are people accessing their healthcare services? Here in the United States, listeners, many know that the only way, many U.S. citizens can access healthcare services is if they have healthcare coverage. That's either through a health insurance plan, what we call a managed care organization, or whether you are a military or a veteran through your VA benefits or TRICARE, or if you are retired and you are now accessing healthcare services through what we call Medicare. Or another way you can access healthcare services are through Medicaid. And that's really where we're going to focus, listeners, is we're going to actually take a look at Medicaid. Again, we know there's been a lot of conversation with our legislators regarding how cuts can be made to help with controlling our deficit, as well as being able to give individuals a little bit more money in their pockets around tax cuts. But in order for us to do that, they've got to take a look at how the spending is being done within the Medicaid program. And so I want to move away from the numbers and the politics, because we're not a political show. And I actually want to bring in the human factor behind Medicaid, right? It's not about the numbers all the time. It really is about healthcare access. It's about what health insurance, this healthcare coverage that's allowing the human factor be able to access healthcare services. So I say that because we've got a wonderful guest on. And we've got an individual by the name of Colleen Cook. She lives in the state of Virginia. We're going to learn a little bit about Colleen and her family. But Colleen, let me give you a little bit of background on Colleen. Colleen is a public school special ed teacher. She works part-time. Her husband is also a teacher. He's an art teacher in the public school. They both are on and have private insurance. They live in, I always say this wrong, Colleen. Albemarle, Virginia. She and her husband are adoptive parents to 4 wonderful children. But these wonderful children have some special needs, and we're going to talk a little bit about her kids. And what's interesting is that Colleen and her husband, their 4 children are not covered by their health insurance plan, their employer plan, I'm assuming, right, Colleen?
My husband and I have health insurance through his insurance coverage.
Okay. But you to have your children are actually covered through the Medicaid insurance plan.
Yes.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Again, listeners, this is about the human factor side of Medicaid. So we're not going to focus on the numbers. We're actually going to focus on why Medicaid exists, right? And what are some of the benefits of Medicaid coverage. So listeners, this is Tracy. I'm coming to you once again as the host of Common Health, and I'm really excited today for this particular show. So Colleen, before we start, can you talk to us a little bit about you and your husband and the kids, and tell us something about your family life? What is it the family likes to do?
And excuse my voice, there's many germs going around kindergarten right now.
Yes.
My husband and I both went to the University of Virginia. He graduated in 2013 with a degree in studio art. And I graduated the next year in 2014 with a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in special education for the early childhood years. We met our first year of college. We dated all through school. A week before I graduated, we got married. Went on our honeymoon. I came back. I graduated the next day. So that was May. And by September that year, we decided to start the process to be foster parents. I did not really make a secret of the fact that I really liked kids. Yeah. And he also obviously really liked kids. And we just thought, for a long time, he worked with the Boys and Girls Clubs of Central Virginia. And both of us just had our works and our academics had all focused on meeting the needs and connecting with kids who have some kind of extra stuff going on. So we decided that foster care was something that we potentially something good that we could potentially do. And so I don't know how familiar the listeners are with foster care, but basically, if you're a foster parent, there are kind of 2 paths you can go down. One, you can say, hey, I'm not really ready for like the comings and goings of foster care, but I have a home to offer children. We are available to receive into our home children who are looking for a permanent adoptive home. And the other route, and they'll be your foster children for about 6 or more months. You'll get checked on by social workers and social services and all of that before it proceeds to adoption. The other route is you can say, hey, we're open for whatever is coming to us, and we'll just see where it goes. The first goal of foster care is always reunification with biological family. So as a foster parent, you're really expected to facilitate that to the best of your abilities, from visits and supporting the kids as they kind of deal with all the emotional aspects of the back and forth visits and transitions between houses, home visits. Parents are generally invited to biological parents are generally invited to medical appointments and encouraged to participate, IEPs, all of that. So We were 24 at the time when we started.
Wow, really?
Yes,
So young.
we were 24.
Wow.
So
let me ask you something really quick, Colleen. Just real quick, tell us the names of your children, okay?
Okay.
And then really quick, I just want the listeners to know. I mean, you, despite the issues that the children are challenged with, just give us one or two things that you and your family love to do.
Oh, okay. I was thinking about this as I was preparing to kind of talk to you today. And I mean, I wrote down like the lists of things they need and diagnoses and medications. And I was like, wow, when you write this all together, not only does it not sound real, but also you would never know from this list all the other things they are.
Exactly.
So thank you for asking that. So our oldest, they range in age from 6 to 14 at this time. Our oldest, Ari, he is super into theater. He's been, he would be so mad I don't know the exact number, more than 11 plays in the last few years. He loves every aspect of theater, from, the production parts to kind of developing characters. He's an avid reader and writer. From a very young age, from 4 years old, I can remember him. What he wanted from the library was biographies. I was like, don't you want to read about this dump truck? And he was like, no, I want you to tell me about the biography of Malcolm X, which I was reading at the time to try to be more, meet his cultural needs. He's Black. And inform myself so I could be a better parent to him. And I was like, oh, okay. So that love of like knowing the details of people's lives, it's his love language. So he will learn everything about you like a Rolodex. And to show you he cares and remembers, he will tell you again when he sees you.
Wow.
Like, oh, you have a sister named Julian. And you worked at the library for 2 years. Like, he'll just repeat your facts back to you. So he's amazing. He's a great kid. My daughter, Michaela, she is so creative. She's an artist. She's she's wonderful with small children and animals. They love her. She loves them. She spent this morning, part of this morning, I homeschool my oldest 3. And so she spent this morning running around after some teenage chickens in our yard, trying to corral them out of the wet spaces from the rain last night. She's amazing, very sweet, friend to everyone. She can look across the pool, see someone she likes, and they're going to be her friend by the time we go home. My son EJ, he is so smart. He will read novels all day if I do not get him off the couch. He loves engineering. He loves puzzles. He anything fantasy and magic and gameplay. I am personally really bad at learning new rules of games, and he is a master of it. So I was like, EJ, we really need to learn to read, because it is 2nd grade and you have shown, zero inclination to learn to read. And he finally did, because he wanted to read other people's Pokemon cards upside down.
Really?
To know what they were going to do. He's very smart. And then our little one, Caden, we actually just finalized his adoption. He is so sweet, so cute. He is for sure a wild card, but he is a master of machinery and locks. He is such a mama's boy. Oh my gosh, he loves our family. He keeps track of where everyone is at all times. When he came to us 21 months ago, he was 4.5. He did not talk. He was not potty trained. And I mean, it's been like, what? It felt crazy because it was crazy. We recently got speech evaluation results back, and basically he had made almost 60 months of progress in 20 months.
Wow.
So it felt crazy because it was like watching typical speech development in triple time.
Yeah.
That's why I feel insane, because this is insane.
Right.
So they participate in our community. They have friends. They do activities. We went out to eat at a restaurant a while ago for the first time with Caden. He felt very fancy. He watched everybody else order, and then he ordered just like my husband. He's like, I guess I'll have the burger. He's like, oh, this is what we do here. So that was fun. They're awesome.
So, and tell me, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you and your husband?
34.
Wow. Wow. You guys did this pretty much coming right off of your marriage. And you had this kindness in your heart and this love to share with 4 children. And I know you know what their backgrounds were, but these children also had special needs, right? So can you just real briefly tell us what those special needs are for all 4 of the children?
So between the 4 of them, I made a list, because I never say it all together, because if someone said this, I would be like, that's a lot. Are you sure? But this is the real list. Autism, alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, which is on the fetal alcohol spectrum, dysarthria, which is kind of like a weakness of the motor muscles of the mouth, global apraxia, which is kind of difficulty with motor skills in general, post-traumatic stress disorder, everybody's got ADHD, and traumatic brain injury. Okay,
so real quick, let's talk about this, okay? And then we're going to talk about why you and your husband made the decision that you did with regards to your health insurance. Okay. Autism, global apraxia, PTSD, ADHD, traumatic stress.
Oh, I'm sorry. Also bipolar disorder. That's a big one. I don't know why I didn't write that down.
And bipolar disorder. And these are children ranging from 6 to 14. So what I want to say to you, and the reason why I'm highlighting that is, listeners, these are children. These are children. These are people who are under the age of 18 that were either because of their circumstances developed these conditions, and we'll put them in the category of behavioral health. But then you have the pathology component of what these children were born with. And I want our listeners to understand that these aren't made up, right? These aren't made up. These are actual conditions that they developed or inherited by way of their pathology as children, but this is taking them also into adulthood. Okay, adulthood, right? These are very difficult, listeners. These are very difficult conditions to have and to manage, right? And this is what our healthcare system is composed of. And many of us don't have these kind of situations. And so what you're hearing from Colleen and her family, a very loving family, they do things like probably many of you all do, listeners, with your family, with your children, but yet you have this component that this family, Colleen and her husband, have. That's a part of their family. They didn't wish it, but it's there. And so I just want everybody to understand that, right? I want people to understand, and listeners, hopefully you'll be able to get little snapshots of this particular podcast, because I'm looking at a woman that looks like you and I, quite frankly, listeners. She's happy. She's got a beautiful smile on her face at times while we're talking, especially when she's talking about her children. And she's her and her husband have made a commitment to having a family, and a family that's really, to me, extraordinary. So with that said, talk to us a little bit, Colleen, of what the children, what services the children need in order to help them to be kids.
So it's kind of fluctuated over time and in a positive way. At first, our first child, our oldest child, he's 14 now. And he came to us in 2015, and he needed an adoptive home. We thought at the time he would be our only child due to his needs. But after a few years, it became apparent that it would be really good for him to have siblings, and he had kind of grown and matured somewhat to the point where we felt like we were capable of taking care of other children. So we opened back up for foster care. And fairly soon we got a call about 2 children who needed a placement, who are biologically brother and sister. And we had really been thinking one more at a time, but we decided we can do this. They came 19 months later. We adopted them.
Wow.
And then after that, we were like, this is, our lives are very full right now. And at that point, we were both still working full time, kind of juggling everything. Things were a little tricky because between the 3 of them at the time, they needed a lot of kind of extra therapeutic care, but school also really burnt them out. So we would have to kind of pick and choose. Okay, this semester, you're going to speech therapy, you're going to OT, and you're going to PT. And then in 6 months, we'll reevaluate. But really, they all needed multiple services all the time. But if we had put them in all of those services, we would do nothing, but they would just be so burnt out. We would have been just running them around to appointments in school from like dawn to dusk. And it was just too much for them. So then the pandemic came. Everybody's lives were kind of turned upside down. And the services that they had been getting at school. So of those 3 kids, 2 of them had an IEP. And 1 was a kindergartner who had therapeutic day treatment at school and was kind of being evaluated to see if a 504 plan would be a good fit. And if you don't know what that is, it's kind of an IEP light. So you don't get any services, you just get accommodations. So you don't get like specialized pull-out math services, but you can have access to a quiet space to do your tests. Okay, the pandemic happened and they lost access to services they were being provided through school, not necessarily, in name, the special ed services were being provided via the computer. However, it really took schools a long time to figure out how to provide the related services like OT, PT, speech, kind of over the computer.
Right.
So while they had been accessing those things for, 120 minutes a month or whatever, they just didn't have them. And, some of the school therapists reached out and were like, try these things with your kids.
Right.
But it wasn't really direct services anymore. So we decided at that time it was our job, as soon as therapeutic providers figured out their game plan for how to keep everyone safe and not spread COVID, that we needed to go and seek out all the services for them in this kind of lull in our lives. Like we couldn't let this derail what they needed.
Let me ask you something, Colleen. And before we get a little more specific about this, and listeners, just bear with us for just a few. you and your husband are still teaching.
He was working for the Boys and Girls Clubs at this time, so he was trying to manage things digitally.
Right.
And I was supposed to be teaching early childhood special education for children with autism on a computer.
Wow.
Which
plus take care of these kids, your own kids.
Yes. And of the 3 kids, 1 was a kindergartner and 2 of them had aides at school. Well, I'm on a separate computer.
Oh my gosh.
It was not the most. I'm sure everyone was surprised by the pandemic, and there wasn't really a lot of game plan ahead of time for like, what are we all going to do if no one can come to school? So I think everybody just tried their best.
Right.
But a little bit of a mess for sure. I think I was thinking about this, and 2021 was our highest density of therapies per month. So in 2021, they went to 8 therapy appointments per week, which is 32 per month. And these were speech, OT, various mental health therapies, depending on their age, either play therapy or various kinds of talk therapy, depending on what they needed, physical therapy. We tried neurofeedback. That's not covered by Medicaid. We tried it. Try everything. They were going to 8 therapies a week. We also pick up 7 medications every month to manage some of these things. And I was able to find better numbers on the average copay for kind of a specialty service, like a therapeutic service, than a medication. So I kind of ran the numbers on that. And assuming a $40 copay for a specialty service, which is kind of on the low end of what that could cost, it would have been $1,280 per month just in copays if we had not had Medicaid. And that does not count the cost of having the children's insurance to start with. Insuring them through my husband's work, that would not count that cost. This was just copays. It did not count copays for medication. It also didn't count copays for, routine medical visits or kind of periodic visits with specialists, like seeing the psychiatrist every 3 months. This was just our weekly numbers.
So, Colleen, I hear what you're saying about if you went through your husband's employer plan. You're a family of 6. We won't talk about the premiums that, even though your employer pays a portion, you guys are still coming out of your pocket and paying a portion of that health insurance as well, right? So you're paying for whatever's coming out of his paycheck to pay for this. You may have a deductible or something like that, or some copays and things like that. But yet when you looked at your 4 children, right? You said because of all these things that you just listed, right? You've made the love commitment to these children, but there's this financial commitment, right? We all know that our children, right? They cost us money. But yet we have to provide for them in the best way that we can. And so you all made this decision to go the Medicaid way. And it sounds like to me, it was a lot around the business decision to do that, the financial component. But how did you learn once you made that decision, once you said, we've got to find another option here, right? Mm-hmm. What did you do to go about looking into Medicaid? But also because of that, Medicaid kind of carries a certain stigma, right? It's the insurance for, people that don't work or poor. So can you talk to us about your family's decision to do what you did, going the Medicaid route?
So when you adopt from foster care, if you adopt a child who's considered to have special needs, and that can be because of a diagnosis, it can be because they're part of a large sibling group, it can be because they're over a certain age, there's a lot of things in the foster care considered special needs. You kind of have a choice. While they're in foster care, they are covered by Medicaid. But when you sign the adoption papers, you're given a choice. Do you want to continue with Medicaid, or do you want to put them on your own private insurance? And for us, there were a few considerations, and some people stack them in some way that I'm not super informed about. But I have heard from people who made that choice that when they were in situations with, for instance, mental health services, where it was kind of a crisis situation, it was down to the wire, like really needed services, there was a lot of kind of arguing between insurance providers about who has to cover this one. And we did not want, some of these things, a lot of these things that our kids have going on, we didn't, when a child comes into your home through foster care, you certainly don't know their whole family history. Right. Honestly, in most cases, you're told, well, they have a delay. And as a special ed teacher, I took that with a grain of salt at all times, because a delay often is caused by something else. And, people really want you to think it's an environmental situation. Like, oh, as soon as they're going to school more regularly, or as soon as you take them to speech therapy, or as soon as there's just in a home where people are, prioritizing them, they'll be fine. And that was kind of the situation with our middle two. But I watched my middle son and his biological sister, he's the younger one. And I was like, I don't think this is fully environmental. Just their developmental trajectories were so different, even after they were both placed with us. So, the fighting for services fighting it out between the two insurances sounded completely overwhelming. Also, this is terrible, and this is kind of worst case scenario. But, in our community, there have been families who, as their children get older, like they really needed some inpatient treatment for whatever mental health conditions and the manifestations of that in their daily life. They really needed like an inpatient stay or kind of a long-term treatment. And that is something that we want to avoid at all costs, just because of the trauma of changing your whole life once again for the kids. But at the same time, we've also known that families who have had private insurance have had to fight for coverage for those services in a way that is not usually the case with Medicaid. I mean, obviously there's documentation required and intervention up to that point required, but if it did come to that kind of worst case scenario of that extreme level of treatment, we didn't want to put anyone, our family or the children, in a position where we couldn't give that to them because of red tape.
Wow. If you had not chosen to go with insurance coverage through Medicaid for your children, and you chose to go through the employer plan, and if you were in that particular situation, what do you think you would have had? What would you have done?
Our lives would be a lot different right now. I don't think, for instance, I love him, but I don't think we would have been in a position to even consider a fourth child. So how that worked, I mean, just because that number I gave you, $1,280, that was with 3 kids.
Right.
And the way our fourth child came to us was unusual. We were not open for foster care anymore, but one of the children's friends had gone into care and he could not stay where he was. So we were his kinship placement temporarily. And, beautifully, luckily, he reunited with his family. But even before he went home, social services was like, you're not all the way licensed yet, but there's this other child that we really would like to move in here. And we were like, okay.
Right.
Because this had not been the plan. I don't think anybody looked at our family and was like, what they need is another child. So it's funny because on his paperwork, it says he had one other foster placement prior to us, but that was kind of officially and unofficially in 2 months. When he moved in here, finally, we were his 9th placement in 2 months. So because of his needs. And he's a cute little guy. He is chaotic. You love him. So I don't think even in terms of when we started again with that kinship placement, who came to us for kinship care, and kinship in foster care means you have any pre-existing relationship with the child. Right. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are biologically related to you. It's just kind of an effort to keep children where they're more comfortable instead of kind of placing them with complete strangers. So, I mean, I don't think, that amount of copays was almost as much as our mortgage.
Jeez.
And I don't think we could have justified, taking resources from the 3 we currently had if we were kind of so down to the wire financially all the time. So first of all, Medicaid has let a family who does have like the love and energy and a little bit of space to give that, because without it, we just wouldn't have the resources at all. So I think that's one of the biggest things that this has changed for us. And the other thing is, when you read through this list of diagnoses or you look through their medication lists and whatnot, you would think our life is pure chaos. And I'm not saying it is not at times, because it definitely is. But the amount of growth we've been able to witness has been shocking. I once worked for this woman who was like, oh, I see why you have such low expectations, so you won't be disappointed. But you just have to, when you work with kids like these and when you parent them, everything has to feel like a miracle. Every little step, every, blossom, every little bit of growth feels like a miracle, because when you know where they came from and you know what they've been through and you know what's going on in their brains, we have no right to expect them to be able to, move past that. It's so heavy. It's so traumatic. It's so much. And if you look at foster care in general, there's this very generational component where, these mental health conditions, the trauma, it didn't come out of nowhere. Right. A lot of these things have happened to our kids because their biological parents were not able, for one reason or another, to have the supports that would help them heal as fully as possible to be able to give their children more stability and more access to what they needed, and to be able to give them all these medical services and therapeutic services and access to specialists. So one of my kids was diagnosed with bipolar at a pretty young age, and that's honestly very uncommon. But the family history checked out. One sign of bipolar disorder is you have manic reactions to SSRIs, which are anti-anxiety medications. We checked all the boxes just at a very young age. And I think about him all the time, because if we hadn't been able to pinpoint that, if we hadn't been able to try everything and see the specialists and have access to that care, he would have grown up through his teenage years just still, even in our house, like experiencing so much emotional and mental instability that would have become who he thought of as himself. And I see that if you look back generations, that was probably the case for some of his biological relatives. And to be able to give him something different so that he can be more than just this kid with all these things on paper is the biggest gift. And, everyone wants to say love them and they will outgrow it,
Right.
or, pray for them, or, and that's all great. That's wonderful. Do all of that if that is what floats your boat. But there is nothing that can replace a mood stabilizer. I'm just
right.
And having the professionals working with you that can identify this is going to help, just in terms of what he feels like he can do and who he is as a person. And that is kind of the biggest gift that we have been able to give them.
I think when people hear this story of yours and your family's story, I mean, you mentioned when you were talking about, our life is chaotic. Well, you know what? I raised 2 children, and one of them had anxiety and depression issues. But at the end of the day, our family life was chaotic. I mean, I had 2 children that I was raising that had to go to school, had extracurricular activities, they had friends. You have your jobs, you got to get food on the table. I mean, I think at the end of the day, we all had these chaotic, or lives, especially when you bring children in the world, right? When you become a family, we used to always say, we could probably be a reality TV show, right? And make some, right? Yeah. Exactly. And make some good money. But at the end of the day, they're still kids. And like I said, they have some challenges. And that's, unbeknownst to them. And, I'm a believer in a higher power. And so to me, my God kind of delivered these children, your children, my children, and all children out there in the likeness of him. And so that being said, we can't help the way that these kids come about. But I say that to say one thing and to ask you this. You're hearing out here that you mentioned all these benefits that you get with your children having healthcare coverage through a state health plan we call Medicaid. And that being said, how do you counter the discussions around that these are this is money that's been funded by taxpayers? How do you help with that discussion, Colleen?
Well, I think ultimately in a perfect world, the foster system exists in order. There's many problems with it, and there's many cases in which this can't or doesn't happen. But in a perfect world, the foster system would exist to let families get the support they need with their challenges in order to heal their families, support their children. And, the lack of that, the need for all of these services is very expensive, But the way to prevent it from happening again is giving these services, several of my children, their parents were in foster care and maybe in settings where they, didn't experience the same things that our children have experienced in terms of support. And if you look, 10 years down the road, it's happening again in their families. So I would say from a financial perspective, the most expensive thing is doing this over and over and over in an endless cycle. And being able to provide the mental health support is something I think that will, in the long term, when it's done well, and when it's done, sometimes insurances are like, we will approve this for 3 months and then not going to approve it anymore because we've already done it and it's not fixed the problem. These problems are not quick to fix.
Right.
It is not a fast fix. I mean, especially the mental and behavioral health components, something that you can't identify. Well, they don't have enough of this chemical their body is making, so let's give them this medicine. It's way more complicated than that. It's a really long-term situation to help people learn to manage that kind of thing. But if you invest in it and if you commit to it and if you're able to provide that support, I think you have potentially stopped that cost from occurring in the next generation and the generation after that. So I think it's one of those things where we need to be doing preventative measures with this generation instead of, this very reactive healthcare system we sometimes run into. Like, first show us the problem, then we'll see what we can do about it. We can identify patterns over time within society, within families. And if we know, this begets this, if we do something now, we don't have to keep heading in that direction. We can head in a better trajectory.
And it's interesting that you say that, because, you're not the first person that I've heard say this. I think we've all kind of looked at our systems. If you kind of look at the way some of our systems are set up, it really is just kind of putting a Band-Aid.
It's very reactive.
Right? It's really, so what if, rather than say, let's cut, right? Maybe we say, let's redirect, right? We still got to do the coverage, right? Because your kids' issues aren't going away, like you said, in 3 months. These are some long-term issues that have got to be addressed, and you've got to stay on top of it, right? So these kids can, one, lead normal lives while they're children, and however we're defining normal, okay? But then we want them to be productive, right? Individuals, once mom and dad kind of want to get them out of the nest a little bit, right? And they've got the potential to be that way. And so it's interesting you say that we can't stop, just flat out make a decision to stop because it's getting too expensive, because it's always going to be, right? It's always going to be expensive, right? But if we just continue to provide the coverage, but yet let's use some of those dollars maybe in an area that will help get at what's the underlying issue as to why we always end up here, right? Yeah. And it's hard, though. I think that's the thing, is that that's not easy what we're saying, Colleen. Right? That's not an easy thing to do. And, so I think in some respects, I hear what you're saying. These kids still need that support. Your family needs the support. Otherwise, it would be way too expensive for you to be able to take care of your children the way that you want to do that. And you've been given that option. But it sounds to me you're in support of potentially looking at ways that our government can find and kind of getting at what that underlying issue, right, is.
Yes. And there's so many realms where more financial support would make a difference. I mean, quality early childhood programs that kind of wrap around the family. It's very difficult to find quick, timely psychiatric care for children. Very difficult. And I think that is like one of the number one difficulties of the foster system, is that you have these children who have come from, generational trauma. They have these big behaviors. They have these big mental health issues. Then, maybe you can get off the wait list in 6 months. So what are you supposed to do for the remaining 6 months? What are you supposed to do every day? I know it's kind of this cascading thing. If you have a mental illness as a child that's not treated, bigger kids, bigger problems. And then we look at, incarceration. We look at all that kind of thing. And, the cost just escalates.
Right.
And so the government might not necessarily want to spend money now, or they might want to cut funding. What will that look like, 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, in terms of, I don't know the numbers. I would be really interested in seeing numbers on, in terms of, if we allocate this much money to mental health care, what does that do to this much money we're spending on prisons? for example. Because there's such a correlation between these different elements of society, and where we can kind of direct funding now for a better outcome later.
When you shared with us some of the challenges that your children have experienced, or are experiencing now, some of these are going to take them into adulthood.
Yes.
Do you see a bright future for your children?
I really do. And in a way, I didn't necessarily see when they were younger. Some of these things, especially as a new parent, I mean, we were 24 years old when we met our youngest son, or our oldest son. And, as we went around the world acquiring various, diagnoses and opinions of professionals, I just couldn't see how this would look. And, if for instance, if you have a 4-year-old who hallucinates, for instance, what does that look like when they're 30? If you have a 4-year-old who hallucinates, you can keep them home in a cuddly space and ride it out. You cannot contain a 30-year-old in the same way, And I didn't have the experience yet to know what would help and how much it would help. But one of my kids has been in therapy for literally, mental health therapy, talk therapy, CBT, or play therapy for 10 years. And where he is now, I could never have imagined even 5 years ago.
Wow.
He would come home from school and he would just be so burnt out on the anxiety of the day that he would walk around our yard for hours after school talking to himself. And this was when he was still in public school, and we just couldn't take everyone to every therapy they needed. And we were kind of picking and choosing what we need right now. And I thought, he wore out the grass. Yeah. He paced a circle, talking to himself for maybe 90 minutes, 2 hours after school every day. And I thought, this is just how he is. It's just who he is. And I need to be okay with that. And this is just what it is. And, now he's older. I'm sending him back to public school next year. He got into this really cool lab school in Albemarle where they try out these kind of new teaching techniques. He's so excited. He's already made a couple friends at the orientations. He's very responsible with his medications. I administer him, but we talk all the time about, this is your key to success. Like, this is the underpinning of everything else that's good that you have been able to pull together. Like, this is so important. And he's very responsible. He goes to therapy every week. He could be a therapist at this point.
Yeah.
He wants to be a therapist. He wants to study psychology and sociology. Like, he's a smart kid. And, 5 years further behind us, I never could have seen it coming together in this way. But, the cumulative impact of access to these services has produced this. Right. This goodness. This, I never could have seen a future where he would live independently, for instance, for all sorts of reasons. And now I really, our children will most of them will probably need some degree of kind of parental support in their adult years, whether it's checking in like, hey, I picked up the meds you needed refilled. I dropped them off at your house. Or, hey, do you need a ride to your doctor's appointment? Or you need me to help you fill out this application? But they're going to be out in society having good lives.
Wow.
And it's because of the services and the cumulative impact of years of those services.
Colleen, a couple of things I want to just also, take into the ending of our show is If there's a message out there for parents that are struggling too with the chaos we talk about, right? To me, I think it's normal chaos. Yeah, your children have a little bit, they're adding a little bit to it, given some of their, extraordinary situation, I'm going to say. What would you say to people out there, parents out there, or even people who aren't parents, regarding the life you chose? Okay, that's the first thing. But then also talk to them, the second piece, talk to them and me as a voter, from your perspective.
Um, I think 10 years ago, I never could have predicted our life would look like this. It's been full of, twists and turns. But one thing that has been consistent has been our access to medical providers who have been able to help us decide on what the next step should be. And that has led us to a place that is way better than we could ever have hoped, honestly, from our first days with some of our kids. And that's really beautiful. Like, our life doesn't necessarily look like other families completely, but we've got all this stuff going on. And I talked to somebody yesterday who teaches a class to one of my kids, and I was like, well, they have this going on, which is why they do this. And I never would have known that. And that blew me away. They were like, I knew they were, neurodivergent, but I didn't know that. And, not that it's a secret, and not that it's, it's a morally neutral thing to have these things going on in their lives. No one picked them. They didn't pick them for themselves. Their brains didn't wire this way because of any bad choices of their own. This is just how it is. And they are going to be out there in society amongst everyone else. And they are already. And they deserve to be taken care of just like everyone else. And in terms of voting, I think a lot. I think pretty much every day about this story. There was a man in Richmond a few years ago who was a teacher, and he experienced some kind of psychiatric episode and actually was shot running, around over the highway without any clothes on in the middle of the psychiatric episode. This was a teacher. This is someone who had gone to school. This is someone who showed up every day for work. I mean, these things can happen to anyone from any, class of society and any background, any parentage, and in any profession. And, that's not what we want our society to look like. We want people to have what they need so that they are not, being harmed running down the highway with no clothes on. And that's the end of their story. People who need care, especially mental health care and therapeutic services, are everywhere. They could be in your family. They could be in my family. Could be anyone you see at work. And, they didn't do anything to bring these things upon themselves. And I think as a society, we want to be the kind of, or at least I would like us to be the kind of people who will uplift each other towards a better future. And I hope that people feel the same way, essentially.
Yeah. Well, Colleen, there's still so much more I could talk to you about, but I also know that you got kids there, and it is still a school day right now. And so I know you need to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. But I do want to say thank you for taking the time to talk with us. Again, listeners, at the start of this show, I wanted to make sure that we are bringing these stories to you as we here are working through in our healthcare system how best we manage ourselves and our families and our friends' mental health issues. But then also some of the diseases that people have. But also, it takes money to finance healthcare. And listeners, there's no way around it. And what I'm hearing today from Colleen is one way we can get at being more thoughtful about how we invest our dollars, our tax dollars, when we put into these programs that we help individuals get healthy, but let's also get at what's causing some of these difficulties. And maybe that's a good way of looking at how we can address some of the issues that we've got around money and funding of our healthcare system. So with that, Colleen, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was so good to be able to talk about this. And I feel very strongly about it as someone who's home a lot. I don't necessarily have the platform to initiate change the way I wish I could. So this was a wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
No, thank you. You've certainly given us real good nuggets today. And listeners, I hope you have had some nuggets as well. So thank you, Colleen. We'll be back with more information. So with that, we'll see you next time, listeners.